Welcome to the Economy and Politics Show. I'm Oto Abasi Abaseko. As we continue the countdown to the 2015 general elections, one critical aspect we're looking at is the job creation aspect. Jobs are very critical because where a nation has a good index of employed and engaged youth and an active working class, it accounts and translates to productivity. So as we look at the issue of jobs in Nigeria ahead of the elections, I have with me a young dynamic economic commentator and social analyst, Kelvin Emmanuel. It's great to have you once again, Kelvin.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good, good. It's about jobs, and as you know, for young people, Nigeria's population has a huge demography of the 19 to 35, and the youth unemployment is becoming a critical issue as we see the major presidential candidates talking about what they're going to do. So we'll be looking at that. But first, I would like to ask, when we look at unemployment and the issue of jobs, we look at figures, we look at the statistics, we look at the data. Do we have that correctly from the authorities like the National Bureau of Statistics? Would you say that what is turned out in terms of the analysis is much credible to tackle the issue of unemployment?
Well, thank you very much for having me once again. The truth is that the unemployment rate in Nigeria is above 50%, above the United Nations Sustainability Index. And despite the fact that Nigeria has moved in ranking in terms of the size of our economy to 26th position at $510 billion based on GDP size, Nigeria still has an unemployment rate at an unsustainable level at about 60%, with a margin of error of plus or minus about 5 to 6%. Margin of error means that there is a differential between the official statistics and the reality on the ground. Yeah, so at the current levels, it's rather sad that we have a lot of unemployed people today in our country, which affects the per capita income of people, the spending power of people, which in turn affects the GDP of the country. But as we go on, I'm sure we're going to touch on the fact that the level of unemployment in Nigeria is not a direct correlation with the inability of the government to create jobs in Nigeria. I'm going
to come to that now. Wolfgang Scoble, several years ago, at this Global Economic Forum panel chaired by the great Tim Sebastian, the finance minister of Germany, that's Wolfgang Scoble, said that it's not government's role to create jobs. That created a lot of discussion because Professor Raghuram Rajan, the CBI governor for India, was also there and discussing that issue. So what's your take? Because in this campaign, we've seen promises of 2 million jobs per year, so spanning 4 years, about 8 million to 10 million jobs. We've seen 740,000 jobs being promised also per year. So what's your take?
Well, thank you very much for that question. You see, this is a very hot topic globally. I remember in 2008 when President Obama took office, in November 2008, the expectations were very high because the unemployment rate was through the roof. And in the last 5 to 6 years, the unemployment rate in America has been slashed by 50%. I remember also in the UK, back in 2008, 2009, when David Cameron came, I think he came in 2010. Yes, the unemployment rate in the UK was nearly 6%. Today, the unemployment rate is almost been halved. So, and you see, the sentiment usually when there is a high unemployment rate is to blame the government. But the reality is that government is not directly responsible for creating jobs in a country. Government is responsible for putting the structures in place that will enable private businesses create jobs and pay tax back to the government to ensure that there's sustainability in government policy and there's a follow-through on the economic agenda from one time to another. Yeah, so the assumption or the thinking, the prevalent thinking all over the world, and this is not common to Nigeria, usually everywhere in the world, when there is unemployment, they blame the government. It's wrong. It's misplaced.
Like in France.
Government is not directly responsible for creating jobs for the country. Businesses are responsible for creating jobs. We've repeated the statistics over and over again that 85% of the jobs created in America are created by small businesses. As a matter of fact, only 5% of the jobs created in America are created by established companies that have more than 1,000 employees, 1 to 50,000 staff strength. So if you have an average of 5,000 companies creating an average of 15,000 jobs, how many thousand jobs do you expect to create? So you want to look at an economy of 300 million people in the US that has a working population of about 95 million, and you ask yourself, how many jobs can the 5,000 largest companies in America that employ between 1,000 and 50,000, how many jobs can they possibly create? So it's a misplaced assumption that, number one, government is directly responsible for creating jobs. Number two, the large and medium-sized companies are responsible for creating jobs. The truth is that small businesses globally, it's been proven over time, are responsible for creating more than 70% of the jobs that sustainable economies that have below 5% unemployment rate, which is the acceptable standards by United Nations.
That is a very, very critical thing, because that means politicians must be very conscious of, because I know that not playing to the gallery, just making promises, you must understand and identify what will be the enablers if you make such promises. That brings me to the issue of the enablers. Now, one issue you raised, which has been critical over developed societies too, is the issue of taxation, because if businesses are the ones that will, of course, they will create the jobs, the tax system has to be reworked in a way that is viable. You see in the US or in France, what are the developments?
Well, thank you very much for that question. You see, we have a challenge. We have a reorientation problem in Africa, and especially in Nigeria. I was just doing some maths, and I discovered that every year, Nigeria spends $500 million overseas on education. Now, what's the enabler for job creation in Nigeria? A report released shows that 60% of Nigerian youths who graduate from universities are unemployable. They don't have the adequate skills necessary for them to work in companies, right? If they're unemployable, the question is, how do we repatriate the funds that are being spent abroad back to fine-tuning our educational system and setting the structures in place to ensure that we have the right educational structure? Number one, to ensure that the 60% that are currently unemployable are employable, because we have about 2 million people who pass through universities every year. So it means that 1.2 million Nigerian youths are not employable. Only 800,000 are. So how do we fine-tune the educational system to ensure that, number one, they're employable? Now, $500 million spent overseas translates to 1% of our GDP on a yearly basis spent abroad. That's aside from the $250 million that is spent on medical tourism also, but that's not our focus for today.
Yes.
So the first question we have to address is, how does the government create the enabling environment through education to ensure that our graduates are employable? Now, you see, another misconception we have in Nigeria is that everybody who comes through the university must get a job. How about young people creating jobs for themselves? Young people between the ages of 18 and 30 creating jobs for themselves. Now, one very credible way that we can fund education, because education is expensive, one very credible way we can fund education in Nigeria is by the government setting up an education trust fund. Now, I know in the past,
an ETF
I know in the past we had several education trust funds in Nigeria. Is the government setting up an education trust fund in such a way that it's in collaboration with Nigerian banks? Don't bring an adjunct bank set up by the federal government like the NMRC or Bank of Industry. No, set up an educational trust fund and partner with commercial banks in such a way that the banks can give out student loans to young people in Nigeria to fund their education. Because you see, when you increase the quality of education in Nigeria, the amount charged as school tuition will increase. You see, Nigerians think education is cheap, but education is not cheap. If you want quality education, you have to pay for it. Now, how do we create a system where, when government does increase the quality of education to churn out employable graduates and graduates who can create jobs for themselves, right? How do we ensure that they're able to pay the tuition? Government can set up an education trust fund, partner with private banks, give out loans to these students, and sign a bond with them in such a way that they say, look, after we graduate from school and get a job, if we do get a job, we'll pay back over the next 5 years. Just like young people today come out, get bank jobs, and pay their car loans over 4 years. Create a system where people can pay the school fees they incurred in school over 3, 4, 5 years of working in companies.
A model that we see in the US.
Exactly. Now, the student loan model. And also, in the case of where they start businesses, that because they start businesses and their businesses are not established, that they can repay back the student loans over 5 to 7 years and create a shock enabler from the government such that, because you can't rule out the fact that about 30 to 40% of these loans given out to be classified as NPL, which are non-performing loans, create a shock such that the government can guarantee about 40 to 50% of whatever loans that the private banks give out to the students, so that in the event that this non-performing book rises up to about 40 or 50% of the total loan book given by private banks, that the government can guarantee and write off the debt.